Hi, welcome to Simple Training with Tanas. Today we are going to study about mammals' name. What is mammals? Why we call these animals as a mammals? Because any animals in which the female gives birth to babies, not eggs, and feed them on milk from her own body, those animals we called as a mammals. Let's study about mammals' name. Wormy, in English we call this as armadillo. Armadillo. Nithumb, in English we call this as ash. Ash. Next, balla, in English we call this as bat. Bat. Bhalu, in English we call this as bear. Bear. Next, Udbilav. In English, we call this as beaver. Beaver. Billy. In English, we call this as cat. Cat. Next, we call this as chimpanzee. Chimpanzee. Guy. In English, we call this as cow. Cow. We call this as coyote. Coyote. Next, heron. In English, we call this as deer. Deer. Kutta. In English, we call this as dog. Dog. Next, we call this as dolphin. Dolphin. Hathi. In English, we call this as elephant. Elephant. Next, Lomdi. In English, we call this as fox. Fox. Langur. In English, we call this as gibbon. Gibbon. Next, we call this as giraffe. Giraffe. Bakra. In English, we call this as goat. Goat. Dhanimosh. In English, we call this as gopher. Gopher. Next, Jalhasti. In English, we call this as hippopotamus. Hippopotamus. Next, we call this as humpback-whale. Humpback-whale. Next, in English, we call this as jaguar. Jaguar. We call this as kangaroo. Kangaroo. Next, we call this as koala. Koala. Next, Tondua. In English, we call this as leopard. Leopard. Next, Sinha. In English, we call this as lion. Lion. Next, we call this as llama. Llama. We call this as mole cricket. Mole cricket. Bandar. In English, we call this as monkey. Monkey. Ood. In English, we call this as otter. Otter. Bail. In English, we call this as ox. Ox. Sewer. In English, we call this as pig. Pig. Next, Sahi. In English, we call this as porcupine. Porcupine. Next, we call this as Puma. Puma. Khargosh. In English, we call this as rabbit. Rabbit. Next, we call this as raccoon. Raccoon. Next, Chua. In English, we call this as rat. Rat. Lal panda. In English, we call this as red panda. Red panda. Next, Ghenda. In English, we call this as rhinoceros. Rhinoceros. Bhed. In English, we call this as sheep. Sheep. Next, Gilhari. In English, we call this as squirrel. Squirrel. Next, Bug. In English, we call this as tiger. Tiger. Next, we call this as walrus. Walrus. We call this as weasel. Weasel. Next, safed ghoda. In English, we call this as white horse. White horse. Next, bhediya. In English, we call this as wolf. Wolf. We call this as zebra. Zebra.